Hello. Thank you for stopping by my YouTube channel and viewing episode number 4, the Martha Mary controversy. This is going to be discussing one of an encounter that Jesus had with Martha and Mary in their home. You may be familiar with it. If not, I'm going to read a short description. My name is John Francis, and so here we go. Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha received him into her house. She had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving. In some places it says burdened with much serving. And she went to him and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me." The Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things." In some places it says you are anxious and worried about many things. One thing is needed. Mary has chosen the better part. Some people say the good part. And it shall not be taken away from her. Now this was in at the very end of Luke's Gospel, the 10th chapter, 38 to 42. Now, this has become quite a controversial passage in the Bible, mainly because of what Jesus said. He said, Mary has chosen the better part or the best part, or the good part. And of course, I would think most people identify with Martha. and they're probably listening to this and saying, wow, poor Martha, she was working so hard to please Jesus, and then he just sort of just said, well, Mary's doing the better thing. So that must have really hurt Martha, you can imagine. And if Martha had a temper, you could imagine there may have been pots and pans flying around too. But they don't mention this in the Bible, so we're not gonna go there. But the controversy comes. Now we can approach this encounter on 2 levels, and we're going to do that. The first level is the literal interpretation. And so the literal interpretation would be that one has 2 choices. If you're interested in being a follower of Jesus, you can either just listen to the teachings and get into sort of a meditative or contemplative state, or you can be out there in the world working, helping the poor, doing what you can to facilitate the mission. Now this passage is particularly relevant to those in a religious life that have devoted their life formally to in a church or some institution. And the question is it better are your prayers more valuable, your contemplative life, or is actually rolling up your sleeves and being active in terms of attending to people's needs and so forth. So that's the sort of the controversy. And since about 99%, I would say, I'm estimating, of the population are Marthas, and they identify with Martha, that this is, this is kind of a surprising thing that Jesus would say. That's where the controversy comes in. Now, we can resolve some of this controversy if we take a more symbolic interpretation to this encounter. We can almost think of this story here, this encounter, as sort of a parable, a living parable. You can think of it as a parable that's being acted out in that sense, and that's why it's in the Bible. And so I'm going to suggest a symbolic interpretation to Martha and Mary and what is happening in this parable. And it may resolve one of the controversy on one level, but it's going to introduce another controversy on a deeper level. So let's look at Mary. Let's get the picture in our mind. She's sitting at the feet of Jesus, and it says she's listening to his teaching. We could say maybe she's meditating on his teachings too. But she's there, and it's interesting, in this little brief encounter, Mary doesn't say a single word. That's recorded there. She's just quiet. She doesn't get into an argument with Martha. Mary doesn't try to justify what she's doing. She's just there, silent, being attentive to Jesus. Now, Martha, on the other hand, I'm going to suggest to you that Martha represents the ego mind, the monkey mind. Okay? And so what happens here is we have a story that sort of relates to the inner life. So what happens when someone sits down quietly to meditate inwardly? Well, often a voice comes up and saying, "What are you doing sitting here, wasting your time? Why aren't you out there doing something worthwhile? Why aren't you contributing to society? Why aren't you making money? Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? Why aren't you mowing the lawn?" All these voices come up in the head. And it's the ego. The ego doesn't like to see the soul in meditation, especially focusing on Jesus. What's going to happen? The ego wonders, what's going to happen to me? Why am I being left out? Okay, so there's the ego talking. That's Martha. And meditation, the word meditation, the Latin root of the word meditation is meditare. It means being returned to the center. Now, in our common vocabulary, sometimes the word meditation means thinking. Meditated on doing something. Premeditated action means you thought about it before you did it. So, but the root word means simply being returned to the center. So in this story, Jesus is the center. He's in the home, which represents, you could say, represents the body or the soul, the body, soul. He's at the interior. And Mary has put her attention on him, the inner Jesus, the inner Christ, making him the center of her attention. In other words, she's putting her attention on Jesus during meditation, and she's not giving any attention to the monkey mind, the ego mind that's chattering. And so I'm suggesting that this is what Jesus meant when he said, Mary chose the better part, or the good part. It's about her attention. Where is her attention? Her attention is on the inner Jesus, the inner Christ. That's what she's doing. She didn't put her attention on Martha. So when we look at this level, this is not really a parable about whether you should be active or whether you should not be active, whether you should meditate or not be meditating. It's about what's happening, what should be the attitude or the focus of attention when one is sitting down to meditate. Now, there is where is the controversy here? I said there'll be a controversy. The controversy is the notion that Mary was silent and didn't speak, and one might interpret this to mean that her mind was still, and she kept her mind still and quiet and was not even thinking. She was just focused, listening to the inner voice of Christ. So the controversy is there are actually, in the Christian community, there are many, many denominations and churches and so forth that actually say that being still, stilling the mind, is actually something that one should not do. These people actually say that it invites the devil because your mind is still, you're not thinking about this and that, so that it gives the opportunity for the devil to sneak in, put his thoughts in there, whatever. That's more of a mainline idea. Now, there is another view that's just the opposite of this, that says, oh, when your mind is agitated and full of thoughts and this and that and worries, that energy that can be manipulated and directed by a force that wants to interrupt your inner life. And that's specifically I'm thinking of in the Orthodox Christian tradition, there's a group of monks called hesychasts, following the path of hesychasm, which means stillness. So in that case, being still means your mind in that state. It's not necessarily that you're blank or spacing out, but you're very centered and stable, focused on the inner Christ, and so you cannot be moved away from that orientation by distractions, by negative mental influences. So on this level, this inner level that we're discussing now, interpretation, there's no question of is a life of prayer better than a life of active service? This is not even the issue. It's a totally different thing. So I think this is how we resolve the problem. And often this is the case in Scripture. When you take when you have a literal point of view, often what happens is you get into these, you interpret a parable literally, as we will see throughout this series. You often get into these contradictions of, well, that doesn't agree with this. You get into a contradiction because you're on the wrong level. You're doing it literally. But when you go to this deeper level, you see there is no contradiction in anything Jesus taught or said. After all, he had his disciples going out and being very active in the world after they got the Holy Spirit. So there's no contradiction. It's just deeper understanding. The controversy, though, comes in those who are against any type of interior prayer that does not involve words, either spoken outwardly or inwardly. This idea of just focusing on the inner Christ without thinking just being receptive and listening. That's the issue here, this fear of stillness that some people have. It's actually what it is. It's the ego. The ego is afraid of dying. If it's, there's a saying which I think is really, I don't agree with. It is, I think, therefore I am. Well, that's saying you got to keep thinking. If you stop thinking, then you're not going to exist. That's where that leads to, and I don't think that's a very good interpretation. Now, for example, let's bring in some backing to what we've been discussing. Saint Teresa of Avila, well-respected mystic, she commented on this. She understood the problem, and she understood it on a deeper level. She said, one can be active in life like a Martha, but at the same time be inwardly still like a Mary. And that's the ideal. You're inwardly still, you're at the eye of the hurricane, but you're outwardly you're working from a still point within you, which you cultivate during meditation, and you learn how to stay in that when you're active. The more you meditate, then when you're active in the world, you can remain inwardly still, and you don't get burned out. People who don't have an inner meditative life, and they're out there trying to do good in the world, if they're sincere, they burn out because they're not being recharged inwardly from the inner Christ, the inner Son of God. And so that's where that goes. And Mother Teresa of Calcutta, Saint Mother Teresa of Calcutta, she understood this. She understood this very well. And she actually had a specific order within her organization devoted to prayer, praying for the intentions of the organization. And they interviewed one of those nuns, I believe after Mother Teresa passed her, and I don't remember when it was, but she told the story. She said, when the nuns they have a certain time of the day when they're going to pray, and when the bell rings, they're supposed to stop whatever they're doing and pray. And she said that this nun said, even if you're about to put a spoonful of food into the mouth of a hungry child, that when the bell rings, you should stop immediately, withdraw the spoon, and go off to prayer. Now that may seem kind of harsh, but it's a way of emphasizing how important it is for those nuns that are giving so much to the poor that they take the time and the discipline to recharge themselves by inner communing with the inner Son of God, Christ. And so that's a very interesting thing important thing to recommend, to remember, also recommend to someone. And something that Jesus said too was shocking. That's not surprising, coming from Jesus. In Mark's Gospel 14, verse 7, Jesus says, the poor you will always have with you. You can help them any time, but you will not always have me, meaning Jesus. In other words, this came up in a certain incident, and what Jesus was saying is, I'm preparing you now for your mission. I'm not always going to be with you physically in the way I am now, but I'm preparing you for your mission, so you'll be more capable of being a channel of divine light and love in the world. So, I hope we've cleared up a little bit of this controversy about what this parable is saying. I know it really disturbs a lot of people that identify with Martha, and so now you're seeing that you can still be a Martha, no problem. Just spend some time being a Mary, get centered and stay centered, so when you're out in the world, you can be of greater service and you won't burn out. Well, I want to thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions or comments, or you have another interpretation, or you think something different, you want to add to something I said, feel free to enter comments in the comments section. I would appreciate it. We'll answer all of them publicly. If you want to communicate directly with me, you can go to my Gmail account. It's innersuncommunion at gmail.com. Innersuncommunion at gmail.com. We're going to explain what that means later on in greater depth in other episodes, so I hope you come back. You might want to subscribe to the channel. If you send me an email, I'll also be sure to notify you. I won't be selling anything or using your email in any way. I have nothing to sell. And and also like this. It helps if you like. If you like it, if you don't, okay, click the don't like channel. And subscribe. Okay, I think we hope we cleared up that very interesting story of Martha and Mary. Have a blessed day, and hopefully you'll be stopping by again for another exciting episode of Inner Sun Communion YouTube channels. Have a great one. Bye now.